On a quiet Sunday morning, February 3rd, 2018, in a peaceful residential neighborhood in Dunedin, New Zealand, a mother stood outside her teenage daughter's bedroom door doing something parents everywhere know, all too well trying to wake a sleepy 16-year-old. But that morning something felt off right from the start. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't sit right in your chest, especially on a morning when a teenager should be slowly stirring awake after a late night on her phone. She called out again, knocked again, waited again. No response. Hours later, police officers were standing at that same front door, and by then everyone understood one thing for certain. Something terrible had happened overnight, though no one yet knew just how deep the story would go. Amber's phone was gone. That alone raised eyebrows. But what followed raised far more serious questions. Strange activity began appearing online. Odd posts, deleted photos, fragments of conversations that suddenly looked far more troubling than anyone first realized. When investigators began looking through private messages, they found hints of something darker, threats, pressure, even what appeared to be blackmail. At that point, it became painfully clear this wasn't just some teenage disagreement or online drama. There was something far more disturbing underneath it all. And at the center of it, the name that kept surfacing was someone the community had trusted for years, a doctor, a man who worked closely with young people, someone well-educated, successful, respected, the kind of person neighbors would describe as a pillar of the community. On the surface, he looked like the last person anyone would ever suspect. But that night would trigger a chain reaction of events that shook New Zealand from top to bottom and forced people to look behind a door they never imagined would need opening. Amber Rose Rush was born on October 29, 2001, in Christchurch, the largest city on New Zealand's South Island. She was the youngest of 3 children. First her older sister Chantal, then her brother Jaden, and finally Amber, the baby of the family. Jaden was just a year older than she was, and the bond between them ran deep. Later, he would say Amber wasn't just his little sister, she was his best friend. Their parents, Lisa and Shane Rush, eventually went through a divorce when Amber was still in her early teens, one of those difficult life shifts many families face. After the separation, Lisa began a new chapter with a man named Brendan McNee, and together they made the decision to leave Christchurch behind and move to Dunedin, a quieter coastal city roughly 236 miles, about 380 kilometers to the southwest. Their new home sat on Clayton Avenue in the suburb of Caversham. Amber and Jaden moved with their mother, while their father Shane stayed very much involved in their lives. The children simply preferred living with Lisa, and for Amber the move to Dunedin felt like a fresh start. Compared to busy Christchurch, Dunedin had a different rhythm, smaller, calmer, surrounded by rolling hills, green landscapes, beaches, and tight-knit schools where people tended to know one another. For a teenager finding her footing, it was the kind of place where life felt simpler. Amber settled in quickly. She enrolled at Taieri College in the nearby suburb of Marskiel. At the time of the incident, she was in year 11, the stage where most students are around 15 or 16, figuring out what they want from the future. Outside school, she held a part-time job at the New World Center City supermarket, and co-workers remembered her as cheerful, reliable, the kind of young employee managers appreciate because she showed up on time and worked hard. Adults around her often remarked she seemed mature for her age, but like many teens, Amber also had big dreams, and the one that lit her up most was dance. She loved it. She practiced seriously, talked about it constantly, and had even begun thinking about turning that passion into a career once school ended. Already looking into studios where she might continue training in everyday life. Amber Rose Rush looked a lot like teenagers everywhere in the late 2010s. She was active on Facebook and Instagram, posting photos with friends, sharing dance clips, sometimes writing down personal thoughts the way young people often do when they're still figuring themselves out. Her social media felt lively, authentic, full of that restless energy that comes with being 16. A young person dreaming big, experimenting with identity, trying to understand her place in the world. And on the evening of February 2nd, 2018, nothing outwardly seemed unusual. Amber was home, spending much of the night on her phone messaging friends, including a young man named Christian Clark. But those conversations carried an edge. She was sending him screenshots of messages, explaining an argument she'd had with someone else. And in those chats, you could hear the frustration creeping in between the lines. Amber sounded tired, upset, determined. At one point, she made it clear she was done staying quiet. The person at the center of those messages was a man named Vened Scant, an adult she had previously been in contact with. Whatever connection they once had was over now, and Amber had reached a point where she wanted to speak openly about what she knew. And that decision, the moment she decided she wasn't going to stay silent anymore, would become one of the most important turning points in this entire story. Christian even offered to come pick Amber up that night and get her out of the house for a while just to cool things down. But Amber brushed it off, telling him she was fine and not to worry, the kind of response a lot of teenagers give when they think they've got things handled. And then, not long after that exchange, her messages suddenly stopped. Around midnight, her sister Chantal received a short text from Amber. Just 2 words: "I'm angry." It didn't seem urgent at the time, and Chantal didn't even see the message until the next morning. By then, heartbreakingly, it was already too late. That brief message would become the final thing Amber ever sent to anyone close to her. Earlier that same night, Amber had taken a bold step. She posted screenshots of conversations she'd had with Vened on social media. In those posts, she accused him of aggressive behavior and claimed he had been supplying alcohol and banned substances to underage teens while organizing parties where those things were happening. For Vened, allegations like that were dangerous, the kind that could shatter a carefully built reputation overnight. Friends quickly noticed the posts circulating online, and one of them, a young woman named Dani, immediately called Vened to warn him about what had just gone public. That call happened almost as soon as Amber's posts appeared. Within minutes, Vened messaged Amber, demanding she remove the screenshots. His tone wasn't calm or apologetic. It was sharp, threatening, insistent. He told her to stay quiet. Amber, however, made it clear she wasn't intimidated. She pushed back, refusing to delete the posts and warning that she intended to hold him accountable for everything she believed he had done. That exchange marked the moment the situation shifted from ugly to truly dangerous. At 11:39 p.m., Vened climbed into his BMW and left the suburb of Fairfield. Before heading to Amber's house, he stopped to pick up Dani, the same friend he had originally met at a party the year before. During the drive, Dani told him exactly where a spare key to Amber's house could be found, hidden beneath a small Buddha statue in the garden. They knew the layout of the place, which meant there were no surprises waiting for them when they arrived. According to GPS tracking and cell tower data, at precisely 12:15 a.m., Vened entered the home. He was dressed entirely in black. Black clothing, black gloves, a dark beanie pulled down low. Not the outfit of someone stopping by for a casual conversation, but someone who wanted to move unnoticed. Once inside Amber's bedroom, the attack happened quickly and violently. Investigators later determined that several knife wounds were inflicted, with the first strikes aimed directly at her neck. The injuries suggested the attacker knew exactly where to target. The autopsy would later reveal that one of the wounds came dangerously close to severing a major artery. Amber died from blood loss before she had any chance to call for help. Additional injuries were found on her back, including damage to her spine, indicating the assault was both deliberate and forceful. Afterward, Vened took Amber's phone and her driver's license, apparently hoping to remove anything that could tie him directly to the crime. He left through the same door he had entered and returned to the car where Danny was waiting. The two then drove toward Blackhead Quarry, a remote limestone extraction site, and it was there that Amber's phone was thrown away. Back at home, they changed their clothes and began trying to clean away evidence. Yet during the process, something strange happened. While cleaning Vened's shoes, Danny deliberately left traces of blood behind. Later, when questioned, her explanations about why that happened kept changing, raising serious doubts among investigators about what she really knew. And just like that, a night that had started with a tense online argument had spiraled into something irreversible. At the time, Vened seemed convinced he had wiped away every trace. Inside the Rush family home that night were for people Amber, her brother Jaden, their mother Lisa, and stepfather Brendan McNee. Everyone except Amber had been asleep. Neither adult reported hearing screams or any disturbance, which left investigators puzzled. How could such a violent attack happen just a room away without waking anyone? Some clues came from the crime scene itself. Pillows had been scattered around Amber's body, possibly used to muffle noise, suggesting they may have been placed there intentionally to prevent any cries for help from being heard. The morning of February 3rd began like any ordinary day. Around 9 a.m., Lisa walked into Amber's room to wake her. At first, she noticed a small blood stain on a pillow and assumed it might be something minor, perhaps a nosebleed during the night. Amber was lying beneath the covers and didn't respond when Lisa spoke to her. When Lisa gently pulled the blanket back, she saw a deep wound on her daughter's neck, an injury so severe that the truth hit instantly. She screamed. Brendan heard her first and rushed toward the room, followed quickly by Jaden. Jaden realized immediately that his mother was in shock and insisted they call emergency services right away. His quick reaction mattered more than anyone realized at that moment. He stayed with his mother, urging her not to move anything in the room that might interfere with what had happened there. That decision to leave everything exactly as it was helped preserve crucial evidence. Within a short time, a forensic team arrived at the house, beginning the careful process of piecing together the events of the night before. Christian had already offered to come get her, to swing by and take her away from that house if things felt even a little off. But Amber brushed it off, saying she was fine, like so many people do when they don't want to cause a scene or worry anyone. Then suddenly, silence, the messages stopped. Around midnight, her sister Chantal received a short text that simply read, "I'm angry." Just 2 words, nothing more. But sometimes the words carry the weight of a storm. Chantal didn't see it until the next morning, and by then the moment had already slipped through their fingers. That message would become the last thing Amber ever sent to someone who loved her. But earlier that night, Amber had taken a bold step. She posted screenshots of her conversations with Vened online, putting everything out there for people to see. In those posts, she accused him of aggressive behavior, of supplying alcohol and banned substances to underage teens, of hosting parties where boundaries were blurred and control quietly shifted. For Vened, those accusations weren't just embarrassing, they were dangerous. The posts spread quickly among their circle, and it didn't take long for one of his friends, Danny, to notice. Almost immediately after the screenshots appeared, Danny picked up the phone and called Vened to warn him. The call came fast, almost like a trigger being pulled. Within minutes, Vened messaged Amber, demanding she take the posts down. His tone wasn't calm or apologetic, it was sharp, threatening. The kind of tone that says someone feels cornered. He insisted she stay quiet, insisted she stop talking. But Amber didn't back down. She made it clear she wasn't scared, that she wasn't going to pretend nothing happened. Her last message carried the weight of a warning. She wanted him held accountable for everything. And for Vened, that was the moment something inside him snapped. At 11:39 p.m., he climbed into his BMW and drove out of Fairfield. But he wasn't alone for long. His first stop was to pick up Danny, the same friend who had called him moments earlier. The same friend he'd met at a party a year before. On the drive, Danny told him exactly where to find the spare key to Amber's house. Tucked beneath a Buddha statue in the garden, they knew the layout. They knew the shortcuts. Nothing slowed them down. Then, at exactly 12:15 a.m., according to GPS records and cell tower data, Vened stepped inside the house. He was dressed completely in black gloves, dark clothes. A beanie pulled low, not the outfit of someone making a late-night visit, but of someone who didn't want to be seen. Inside Amber's bedroom, the attack was swift and brutal. Vened stabbed her multiple times, immediately targeting her neck, aiming directly for the carotid artery. The precision of the wound suggested something chilling, that the person holding the knife understood exactly where to strike. The autopsy would later confirm how close one of those cuts came to severing the artery entirely. Amber died from massive blood loss before she ever had the chance to reach for her phone or cry out for help. Additional wounds were discovered on her back, including injuries to her spine, marks that investigators believed showed deliberate, forceful intent. Afterward, Vened took Amber's phone and her driver's license, likely hoping to remove anything that could tie him to what had happened. He slipped back out through the same door he'd used to enter and returned to the car where Danny was waiting behind the wheel. Together, they drove toward Blackhead Quarry, a limestone extraction site. A place quiet enough to swallow evidence. That's where Vened threw Amber's phone away. Later, back at home, they changed clothes and tried to clean up, wiping away whatever traces they thought might betray them. But while cleaning Vened's shoes, Danny left small traces of blood behind, something that would later raise serious suspicion when his explanations kept shifting and contradicting themselves. And just like that, a night that started with an online argument had turned into something irreversible. Vened believed he had erased every trace, but the truth was still sitting inside that quiet house. At the time of the attack, for people were inside Amber, her brother Jaden, their mother Lisa, and her stepfather Brendan Mitten. Everyone except Amber was asleep. No one reported hearing screams or a struggle, which left investigators asking a disturbing question. How could something so violent happen without waking anyone? Part of the answer may have been lying right there in the room. Pillows were scattered around Amber's body, possibly placed deliberately to muffle any sound, as if someone had thought ahead, making sure any cry for help would never travel beyond those walls. The morning of February 3rd started like any other. Round 9 a.m., Lisa walked into Amber's room to wake her up. At first, she noticed a blood stain on the pillow and assumed it might be a simple nosebleed. Amber lay beneath the covers, still and quiet. But when Lisa pulled the blanket back, the truth hit all at once, a deep wound across her daughter's neck so severe there was no mistaking it. Lisa screamed. Brendan heard it first. Then Jaden came running. Jaden quickly realized his mother was in shock and insisted they call emergency services immediately. His quick thinking kept the scene from being disturbed. He stayed close to his mother, stopping her from touching anything that might destroy evidence. That moment of clarity would later become crucial for investigators. Not long after, forensic teams arrived and began examining the house. The first place they looked was Amber's room. Aside from the area around her body, the room was surprisingly tidy. But the bedding and pillows were soaked in blood, even before the autopsy report came back. Experts at the scene agreed on the cause of death: massive blood loss. The precision of the neck wound made investigators suspect. The attacker might have had professional knowledge of human anatomy, a chilling theory that would later prove accurate. Police secured the home and began questioning the family. Jaden, Lisa, and Brendan were all visibly shaken. Officers confirmed the front door had been locked, the windows untouched, and there were no signs of forced entry or struggle elsewhere. In the house, all signs pointed to a chilling conclusion: the person responsible knew exactly how to get inside. From that moment forward, the case shifted into a full criminal investigation. Every detail was documented: fingerprints, fibers, possible blood traces outside the bedroom, security footage from nearby homes, and a list of anything missing from the scene. The working theory was clear: the perpetrator had acted quickly, deliberately, and with chilling precision. Amber was the only target. No one else in the house had been harmed, suggesting the attacker knew exactly who was there and had planned the attack ahead of time. As detectives began interviewing Amber's friends and acquaintances, one name kept coming up again and again: Vennet Scant, in his early 30s. He looked respectable on paper: a physician with medical training, a stable career, and the kind of professional standing that earned trust in the community. But beneath that polished surface, troubling details were starting to surface. Not long before the incident, his reputation at work had begun unraveling. Colleagues reported he showed up under the influence, crossed professional boundaries, and once even treated a patient while impaired. The hospital had already started disciplinary procedures. In one particularly strange incident, he falsely claimed his mother had died as an excuse for missing work. Piece by piece, the image of a respected doctor began to crack, revealing someone spiraling both professionally and personally. There were other red flags to his unusual closeness with teenagers. Vennet frequently hosted parties at his home in Fairfield where underage guests attended, and alcohol and banned substances were reportedly handed out freely. Over time, that environment created a strange dynamic. Teens came for the free entertainment, while Vennet gained access and influence over them. According to his roommate and the roommate's girlfriend, the guests kept getting younger and his behavior more inappropriate. Amber had first met Vennet at one of those gatherings back in 2017, through Danny, the same teen who later helped him that night. At first, Vennet seemed interesting, mature, someone older who treated her like an equal. But gradually his attention toward her became more focused, more personal. Amber, unaware of the risks, continued talking with him, even sharing her goals and thoughts about the future. At one point, she even considered renting a room at his house. Whether her parents knew about that plan remains unclear. But eventually something happened that shattered whatever trust had existed. In January 2018, after one of Vennet's parties, Amber stayed overnight at his place. During the night, she woke up to a terrifying sensation: someone touching her. Her shirt and bra had been removed, and a hand was inside her underwear. When she looked around, the only other person in the room was Vennet. Shocked and furious, she slapped him, pulled away, and left immediately. That moment changed everything from then on. Amber cut off all contact. In her mind, someone she once thought was a friend had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Around the same time, other young women began sharing similar experiences from those parties. One described waking up to find a hand on her in almost the exact same way. Another witness claimed they saw Vennet touching a girl who had passed out on a couch, and when confronted, he allegedly replied with chilling confidence, "I'm a doctor. I know what I'm doing." These stories weren't isolated. Among Amber's friends, distrust toward Vennet had grown deep. Many were openly afraid of him, confused about why a grown man with no family and no serious relationship spent so much time surrounding himself with underage teens. What once seemed strange had begun to feel dangerous, and when Amber finally cut ties with him, refusing to stay silent about what had happened, the situation didn't end quietly. Instead, it escalated. Vennet didn't take rejection the way a normal person would. When Amber pushed him away, when she made it clear she wanted nothing more to do with him. He didn't disappear into the background like someone who understood boundaries. Instead, he leaned in harder. The messages kept coming, one after another, always dressed up with some new excuse to reach out. At first, it might have looked like persistence, the kind of awkward insistence people sometimes mistake for affection. But it didn't take long before the pattern turned dark. Then it began offering Amber money, real money. First it was $2,000, framed casually, almost like a joke that wasn't really a joke. Then the number jumped to $20,000. $20,000 in exchange for intimacy. The message behind it was unmistakable. He wasn't asking anymore, he was trying to buy control. Amber said no. She said no more than once. As she made it clear the age difference alone should have been enough to end the conversation. But Vened kept pushing, ignoring every refusal like it was just another obstacle he could bulldoze through. Week after week through January of 2018, those messages continued. The offers becoming more manipulative, more desperate, as if he believed money could erase what had already happened or silence someone who had started seeing him for exactly what he was. But Amber wasn't naive and she wasn't careless. She understood something important. If someone was behaving this way, evidence mattered. So she started documenting everything. Every message, every offer, every strange comment. She took screenshots and saved them, quietly building a record of the conversations. As she didn't keep them hidden, she shared them with friends, letting people she trusted know what was happening. Amber was already thinking ahead. She was considering going to the police. The people closest to her knew that, and later their knowledge would become a critical part of the investigation, because it proved something important. Amber had been preparing to expose him. One exchange between them made that crystal clear. Amber stopped playing polite and told Vened directly she was done with the pressure. She told him she was tired of the manipulation and ready to speak out about everything. She understood exactly what the truth could do to him. A physician with a reputation, a career, a professional license, those things could vanish overnight if the right evidence reached the right people. But Amber didn't care about protecting him anymore. She had crossed the line from silence to accountability, and that shift changed the entire dynamic between them. At the same time, another tension crept into their conversations, a strange argument about his credit card. Investigators later found references to a small online purchase made using Vened's card, a charge he believed Amber had made. The transaction itself was never officially confirmed as the central motive, but it appeared repeatedly in their messages. Vened accused her of theft, throwing the accusation out like a weapon. But Amber fired back without hesitation. She told him he had no right to talk about stealing while engaging in behavior that was already breaking the law. That argument wasn't just about money, it was about power. The relationship between them had fully collapsed into hostility. Amber was angry, frustrated, emotionally drained, but fear wasn't what drove her messages. Her words stayed firm, almost defiant. She made it clear she wasn't going to stay quiet, and that she still intended to go to the authorities and show them exactly what had been happening behind the scenes. And somewhere inside that escalating conflict sat another figure, someone younger, someone who might have seemed like just another teenager in the background, but whose role would turn out to be far more serious. Danny. Among their circle he was simply known as Danny, a 16-year-old who had become closely tied to Vened's world. At first glance, he might have appeared to be just another kid hanging around the parties. Another teenager drawn in by free drinks, loud music, and the strange freedom of an adult house with no real supervision. But as investigators would later uncover, Danny wasn't just observing the environment, he was helping shape it. He acted as a bridge between Vened and local teens, inviting people to gatherings, introducing friends, bringing new faces into that house in Fairfield where the parties kept happening. He stayed over frequently, building a casual relationship with Vened that revolved around hanging out, drinking, and a sense of misplaced trust. Over time, that connection placed him right at the center of the story. When the tragedy happened, Danny didn't step away from Vened the next morning. Instead, he stayed involved. In fact, investigators would later discover that he helped cover things up. When questioned later, Danny tried to minimize his role, saying he had simply followed instructions and didn't fully understand what was going on. According to him, he had no idea what had happened inside Amber's house that night. But the evidence told a different story. Investigators found that he knew exactly whose belongings were being destroyed and exactly why. Vened was desperate to get rid of them so quickly. One detail stood out in particular, something that raised serious red flags for detectives. The day after the crime, Danny returned to the place where evidence had been discarded. At that location, he found remnants of clothing pieces that could have been directly tied to the events of the night before. But instead of contacting police, instead of telling anyone in authority, he kept quiet. He walked away and said nothing. Silence became his strategy. And it didn't stop there. Danny also deleted conversations from his phone messages between himself and Amber, and messages between himself and Vened. Those texts would later be considered potential key evidence, records that might have clarified exactly who knew what and when. By deleting them, Danny erased pieces of the timeline investigators were trying to reconstruct. When detectives finally sat down with him for formal interviews, his story shifted more than once. At first, he insisted he had no idea Vened was heading toward Amber's house that night. He claimed he thought they were just driving around, that he had no clue what Vened intended to do. But as investigators dug deeper, the inconsistencies began stacking up. GPS data placed them together during critical moments. Phone records showed communication patterns that didn't match his story. Statements from other witnesses contradicted parts of his timeline. The more detectives looked, the clearer it became Danny knew far more than he was admitting. What had initially seemed like a teenager caught up in someone else's chaos slowly started to look like something else entirely, a participant who had played a role in connecting the people, sharing the information, and staying silent afterward when the truth might have changed everything. Even though Danny was never formally charged, his behavior left investigators and the public with serious questions that never fully went away. Was he just a teenager caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? A convenient middleman connecting an adult to local teens? Or had he knowingly helped enable something far more dangerous? The truth seemed to sit somewhere in the uncomfortable middle. Eventually, Danny did testify against Vened, but that decision didn't come immediately. It only happened once he realized police were already closing in on the truth without his help. By that point, the investigation had gathered enough pieces that his silence was no longer protecting anyone, least of all himself. His sudden shift from helping Vened to cooperating with investigators allowed him to avoid criminal charges, but the ethical shadow remained. After all, he had seen warning signs, he had been present during critical moments, and when things started falling apart, he chose silence instead of stepping forward. That silence would follow him long after the case was over. Meanwhile, Vened Scant's plan to erase every trace of the crime was already collapsing. Despite the careful steps he believed he had taken, destroying evidence, cleaning surfaces, discarding belongings, the investigation gained speed almost immediately as pieces began falling into place. Technology, biological evidence, and his own series of mistakes formed a trail he couldn't outrun. Investigators soon learned that every message on Amber's phone had been deleted the night she died, and the phone itself had been destroyed. Vened had even recorded himself smashing the device against a rock before throwing it into a ravine, convinced he had eliminated the one object that could directly connect him to the crime. But what he didn't realize was that another silent witness had been traveling with him. the entire night his car, the built-in GPS tracker inside his BMW, had logged every movement automatically. When investigators reviewed that data, it mapped out his route step by step, confirming he had driven to Amber's neighborhood at the exact time the attack occurred. The digital record placed him there whether he admitted it or not. And the evidence didn't stop there. Inside the BMW itself, forensic experts discovered small but crucial traces of Amber's blood. Even though Vennet had attempted to clean the vehicle thoroughly, tiny remnants remained on the front passenger's seat and tucked beneath the inner door panel, where cleaning efforts had missed them. To the naked eye, the car may have looked spotless, but under forensic examination, those hidden traces told a different story. The vehicle had carried more than just passengers. That night it had carried evidence. Investigators also uncovered another disturbing detail at the home of Vennet's former girlfriend. The day after the crime, he had shown up there unexpectedly, claiming he was simply stopping by for a visit. While there, he asked if he could start a fire, casually explaining that he wanted to get rid of some old lab coats. At the time, it might have sounded harmless, even practical. But what went into that fire were not medical uniforms. Witnesses later testified that he burned a pair of sneakers, jeans, and a t-shirt believed to be the exact clothing he had worn the night of the attack. One witness remembered noticing stains on the fabric that looked very much like blood before the flames consumed them. Additional testimony came from several teenagers who had interacted with Vennet both before and after Amber's death. Their statements revealed another troubling pattern. Some said he had offered them money to stay quiet, asking them not to speak to police about the parties at his house or the messages they had exchanged with him. Others recalled that he seemed nervous and agitated, repeatedly asking what people were saying and whether anyone had talked to investigators yet. One teen described seeing him scrubbing dirt off his sneakers and asking if anyone had bleach he could use. Each individual detail might have seemed small on its own, but together they formed a powerful picture. The digital records, the forensic findings, the burned clothing, and the witness statements all pointed in the same direction toward Vennet Scant. Not only did the evidence suggest he had committed the crime, it also showed he had actively tried to destroy evidence and influence potential witnesses afterward. Despite all his efforts, he hadn't managed to erase the truth. By the time the case reached court, the investigation had grown into one of the most closely watched criminal trials in New Zealand. The trial of Amber Rose Rush began in 2019 and stretched over several intense weeks. It quickly drew national attention as details of the case unfolded in the courtroom. In total, 69 witnesses were called to testify. The lineup included teenagers who had attended Vennet's gatherings, police officers who had worked the investigation, forensic experts who analyzed the evidence, and Amber's own friends and family members who described the young woman she had been. Both allies and former acquaintances of the accused also took the stand, each adding another piece to the timeline the court was trying to understand. Inside the courtroom, it became a high-stakes confrontation between two very different narratives. Prosecutors carefully reconstructed the events leading up to the night Amber died, presenting the digital evidence, the blood traces, the GPS data, and the witness accounts that tied Vennet to the crime. The defense, meanwhile, worked to dismantle that version piece by piece. Vennet himself denied every accusation placed before him. He insisted he had never gone to Amber's house, had never attacked her, and had no idea who might have been responsible. His legal team tried to shift suspicion elsewhere, suggesting that Danny, the same teenager who had been with Vennet that night and had helped dispose of evidence, could have been the real perpetrator. They also attempted to frame the conflict between Amber and Vennet as a form of blackmail, claiming she and her social circle were trying to extort him. But as the weeks passed and testimony continued, The physical evidence and digital records painted a far different picture than the defense theory suggested. Throughout the trial, Vened maintained a calm, almost distant presence when questioned. He answered quietly and briefly, rarely elaborating beyond what was necessary. Observers in the courtroom described his demeanor as composed but cold. He avoided looking toward Amber's family, keeping his eyes fixed ahead or lowered toward the table. Emotion never seemed to break through the surface. On the other side of the courtroom, Amber's loved ones struggled through each day of testimony. Her mother, Lisa, found the hearing so overwhelming that she had to step outside the courtroom several times just to regain her composure. Her brother Jaden chose not to attend the trial at all after giving his earlier statement. Unable to relive the events again and again through witness testimony, for them, every detail discussed in court was a painful reminder of the night their lives changed forever. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the prosecution delivered a closing argument that cut straight to the heart of the case. They told the jury this wasn't simply an act of violence. It was, they argued, a calculated decision to silence someone who had been preparing to expose the truth. A respected professional had allegedly used his position to hide troubling behavior, and when that mask began to slip, he chose to eliminate the person who threatened to reveal it. The courtroom grew quiet as the final words settled in. Now the decision no longer belonged to investigators or attorneys. It belonged to the court. Would they believe the dozens of witnesses, the forensic evidence, and the digital trail that placed Vened at the scene? Or would they accept the version offered by a man whose explanations often failed to align with the facts after weeks of testimony and deliberation? The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The verdict in the Amber Rose Rush case was delivered. The verdict finally came down, and the courtroom fell into that heavy silence that only happens when everyone knows a life has just been permanently changed. Vened Scant was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 19 years before he could even be considered for parole. Yet even in that moment, even with the weight of the evidence stacked against him, he never admitted guilt, not once. Instead, almost immediately after the sentencing, his legal team began preparing an appeal, clinging to the possibility that the conviction could somehow be overturned. For Vened, that appeal became the only narrative he was willing to accept, the idea that the system had gotten it wrong and that one day he might walk free again. But about a year later, that last thread of hope snapped. The Court of Appeals rejected his request. The conviction would stand. And that same evening, inside his cell at the Otago Corrections Facility, Vened Scant took his own life. Prison staff later found him after he had carried out the fatal act. Investigators determined that he had received the written notice of the appeal rejection shortly beforehand. According to corrections officers, he hadn't shown obvious signs of instability leading up to that moment. His cell still contained books, handwritten notes, and personal belongings neatly arranged. There was no suicide note, no final message explaining why. His death immediately sparked public criticism directed toward the correctional system. People began asking uncomfortable questions. How could someone convicted of such a serious crime, someone who had just lost a critical appeal, be left without close monitoring during such a vulnerable moment? The backlash was strong enough that it triggered real policy changes. In response, New Zealand introduced stricter inmate management procedures, particularly during the high-risk 72-hour window following a verdict or appeal denial, requiring closer observation of prisoners during those emotionally volatile periods. But even that wasn't the final chapter of the tragedy. Months later, Amber's mother, Lisa Rush, also took her own life. The grief had been crushing from the beginning. Losing her daughter in such a brutal way, enduring the emotional strain of the trial, and living under the glare of national attention had slowly drained everything from her. People close to Lisa later said she had become emotionally exhausted, like someone running on empty long after the tank was dry. After Amber's funeral, she gradually withdrew from the outside world. She stopped working, avoided speaking to the media, and distanced herself from friends who tried to support her. The grief didn't fade, it settled in deeper. At her memorial service, her son Jaden and his stepsister delivered short but deeply emotional speeches. They described Lisa as someone who had tried desperately to stay strong for everyone around her, but in the end faced her pain largely alone. The weight of losing her daughter had simply been too much to carry. Jaden spoke about the outbreak of the past year, explaining that in the span of 12 months he had lost not just his sister, but also his mother. The family that once filled that home had been shattered beyond recognition. After Lisa's death, Amber's stepfather Christopher turned his grief into something else: action. He launched a public campaign pushing for stricter penalties for aggressive crimes involving minors, determined to make sure something meaningful came out of the devastation. He submitted a petition calling for life sentences without parole for individuals who commit such acts. The petition quickly gained traction, gathering tens of thousands of signatures from people across the country who had followed the case. Christopher argued that if stronger legal consequences had existed earlier, then its scam might have faced accountability long before things reached the point they did, and Amber might still be alive. The case ultimately led to changes not only in correctional policies, but also in broader discussions about legislation and judicial oversight. Yet for the Rush family, those reforms were little comfort. Laws could change, procedures could improve, but none of that could bring back the people they had lost. In just 2 years, the family had buried a daughter, a mother, and the belief that justice always arrives before tragedy does. After Amber's death and later her mother's passing, the house where the crime occurred was left empty. The furniture was removed. The windows were boarded up. The place that once held ordinary family life slowly turned into a silent reminder of everything that had happened there. Only one person remained in the city: Jaden, Amber's older brother. He chose not to leave Dunedin, even though every street likely carried memories he could never escape. Instead, he kept a low profile, avoiding public attention for a long time. Eventually, he released a short statement. In it, he admitted that every single day felt like a struggle just to get up and keep moving forward. Amber had been his closest friend, someone he always felt responsible for protecting. And the thought that haunted him most was simple, but unbearable. On the night she died, he had been sleeping in the room next door and heard nothing. That silence, he said, was something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Amber's school also faced scrutiny. An internal investigation revealed that students had mentioned adult-hosted parties several times in the past, but those warnings had not been taken seriously enough. In response, the school introduced new programs focusing on personal boundaries, manipulation awareness, and student safety. Anonymous drop boxes were placed in classrooms so students could report concerns without fear of retaliation. After these measures were introduced, more students began speaking up about experiences and rumors they had previously kept quiet. Some admitted they had heard whispers about the so-called doctors' parties, but had been too afraid or uncertain to report what they knew. The controversy surrounding the case didn't fade quickly. Then Scant's name became tied to wider discussions about oversight failures within professional institutions and the need for stronger safeguards. When adults interact with young people, the case forced the country to confront an uncomfortable truth: charm, status, and professional success don't guarantee that someone's intentions are safe. Sometimes the most dangerous individuals are the ones who appear trustworthy on the surface. For Amber's family, life would never return to what it once was. But her story sparked conversations across communities, schools, and households. Parents, began paying closer attention to warning signs. Teachers became more alert to unusual behavior. Friends learned to take concerns seriously when someone spoke up about discomfort or pressure. Those changes can't bring Amma back, but they may serve as a warning, a reminder that paying attention, asking questions, and speaking up early might protect someone else from the same fate. And that, perhaps, is the one piece of meaning that can still rise from a story that began with a simple message, a growing sense of danger, and a young woman who refused to stay silent. If this case left you thinking, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We share real crime stories every night. Until next time, stay sharp and stay vigilant.